I never imagined that the daughter I raised would try to lease my $8 million penthouse behind my back. The betrayal cut deeper than any wound I had ever known. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. Most days, my routine is a quiet hum of loneliness. My Upper East Side penthouse, with its towering windows and views of Central Park, used to fill me with pride. Now it feels like a gilded cage. The cold, polished marble counters reflect the morning light, but they also reflect my solitude. The scent of fresh lilies from the weekly delivery fills the air, yet no one is here to appreciate their beauty with me. The absence of any laughter or warm conversation presses on me like a weight I carry from room to room. That particular Tuesday afternoon changed everything. I was sitting in my favorite armchair, the burgundy velvet one that faces the windows, watching the autumn leaves dance in Central Park. The silence was broken by a sharp knock echoing through the spacious apartment. A courier in a brown uniform stood at my door, holding a manila envelope with my name printed across the front in bold black letters. I signed for the delivery with trembling fingers, though I didn't know why my hands were shaking. Inside that envelope were lease agreements. Official papers. Stamped and notarized. My name was there, forged so perfectly it almost looked real. Almost. But I knew my own signature, and this wasn't it. My daughter's name was there too, legitimate and bold, as if she had every right to lease out my home from under me. The blood rushed from my face so fast I had to grip the marble counter to steady myself. I remembered the silk scarf I had gifted her last Christmas, the one tucked away in my drawer upstairs. Hermes. Blue and gold. $800. I had believed in her so fiercely then, watching her eyes light up as she unwrapped it. But reality had flipped like a coin in the air, and I was left holding nothing but the bitter understanding of betrayal. Let me take you back to the beginning, to understand how I became the woman standing in that marble foyer, holding papers that proved my own daughter was trying to steal my home. I was always the woman who put her family first. Always. It wasn't a choice, really. It was who I was raised to be. I remember the cold nights in our cramped Brooklyn apartment, before we moved to Manhattan, before the money came. I was 28 then, working 2 jobs while my husband spent his evenings at the local bar. The radiator barely worked, and I would layer blankets on my children's beds, making sure they were warm while I shivered in my thin nightgown. I scraped together every penny so my children could have private schools, proper medical attention, clothes that didn't scream poverty. "Mom, we need more," my daughter Sarah would say, standing in the doorway of our tiny kitchen. She was 14 then, already beautiful, already knowing how to use that beauty to get what she wanted. And I would smile through my exhaustion, my back aching from cleaning office buildings all night, and hand her another $20 bill from my dwindling savings. "Of course, sweetheart. Whatever you need." When my husband finally left us for his secretary, I should have been angry. I should have demanded support, fought for what was owed to my children and me. Instead, I forgave. I forgave him for the years of neglect, for the drinking, for the affairs I pretended not to know about. I forgave because I thought family mattered more than pride. Family was supposed to be everything, wasn't it? The money came later, much later. An inheritance from an uncle I barely knew, followed by smart investments that multiplied into millions. Suddenly, I could give my children everything I had dreamed of giving them. The penthouse. Private colleges. European vacations. Cars. Clothes. Whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted it. But something strange happened as the money grew. My children seemed to distance themselves from me, even as they grew closer to my bank account. My son Michael would call me unreliable, even though I had never missed a payment for his medical school tuition. Sarah would demand favors, then disappear for months without a word. The silences after they asked for help were deafening. Empty echoes in my beautiful, lonely apartment. "You're too old-fashioned, Mom," Sarah would snap when I suggested we have dinner together, or when I asked about her job, or her boyfriend, or anything about her life that didn't involve my checkbook. She would walk away before I could respond, her heels clicking against the marble floors like a countdown timer to my next heartbreak. Each moment made my heart ache in ways I couldn't describe to anyone who would understand. I had everything money could buy, but I was starving for the one thing money couldn't purchase: genuine love from my own children. Sometimes, in the quiet hours after midnight, I would sit by my window and wonder if love was just a currency I kept paying into without any return on my investment. The small cruelties accumulated like interest on a debt I didn't know I owed. Birthdays passed without phone calls. Christmas mornings arrived with expensive gifts sent by assistants, never a personal touch. When I was hospitalized with pneumonia 2 winters ago, Sarah barely checked in. One text message: "Hope you feel better soon." Not even her name at the end. Just those 5 words floating in the digital void between us. Michael was worse in some ways. He would take my money gladly, then lecture me about my spending habits. "You're being too generous with Sarah," he would say, as if he wasn't also living off my generosity. His apartment in Soho, his car, his expensive suits, all funded by the mother he seemed to barely tolerate. But it was the forged signature that broke something inside me that I didn't even know was still intact. As I sat in my living room that Tuesday afternoon, tracing the fake curves of my own name with my finger, a deep hollowness opened inside me like a sinkhole. The realization wasn't just about the money or the apartment. It was about the complete disregard for me as a human being. I wasn't a mother to Sarah. I was just an obstacle between her and what she thought she deserved. I sank onto the nearest chair, still holding the lease papers. The porcelain cup I had been holding slipped from my other hand and shattered against the floor, the pieces glinting like my broken trust scattered across the marble. The sound echoed through the apartment, sharp and final. Silent tears streamed down my cheeks, and for the first time in years, I didn't try to stop them. That evening, as I swept up the broken porcelain, I found myself thinking the unthinkable. Maybe I could say no. Maybe I could stop giving, stop enabling, stop allowing myself to be betrayed over and over again. But the fear clawed at me from somewhere deep and primal. What if loneliness swallowed me whole? What if saying no meant losing the only family I had, broken as it was? I walked to my bedroom and stared into the full-length mirror that had reflected my face for 15 years. The woman looking back at me had aged beyond her 72 years. Her eyes were hollow, her skin pale from too many nights spent wondering where she had gone wrong. I opened my jewelry box and began pulling out old photographs tucked behind my pearls. Pictures of Sarah as a little girl, her arms wrapped around my neck. Pictures of Michael's college graduation, his smile wide and genuine. Pictures of family vacations when we still looked like we belonged together. One by one, I placed them in a shoebox. It felt like closing a chapter that had once given me hope, but now only brought pain. As I sealed the box with tape, I whispered to the empty room, "I can't keep living like this." Have you ever reached a moment where you realized you had to choose between preserving your dignity and maintaining relationships that were slowly killing your spirit? That was my moment. That night, with broken porcelain swept away and old photos packed away, I stood at a crossroads I had been avoiding for years. The next morning, Sarah called. Not to check on me, not to see how I was feeling. She wanted money for a new business venture. Some boutique she wanted to open in the village. $50,000, she said, like it was pocket change. For the first time in my life as her mother, I said no. "What do you mean, no?" Her voice cracked through the phone like a whip. I could hear the shock, the disbelief, the anger building. "I mean no, Sarah. I won't fund another one of your projects. Not after what you tried to do with my apartment." The silence on the other end stretched so long I thought she had hung up. Then came the words I had been expecting but still wasn't prepared for. "You're being ridiculous, mother. I have no idea what you're talking about." The gaslighting was swift and efficient. She had perfected this technique over the years, making me doubt my own perceptions, my own reality. But this time, I had papers. I had proof. I had finally reached the limit of my willingness to be manipulated. "I have the lease agreements, Sarah. With your real signature and my forged one." Another silence. Then the tone shifted from confusion to indignation. "Someone must have stolen my identity. This is identity theft, mother. You should be supporting me, not accusing me." But I was done. "I won't discuss this anymore. The answer is no." I hung up the phone, and for a moment, the apartment felt like it was spinning around me. Had I just severed the last thread connecting me to my daughter? The fear was overwhelming, but underneath it was something else. Something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. That night, something miraculous happened. I slept. Not the fitful, anxious sleep I had grown accustomed to, but deep, restorative sleep. 8 uninterrupted hours of peace. When I woke up, the first thing I noticed was how quiet the apartment was. Not the oppressive quiet of loneliness, but the serene quiet of solitude. For the first time in years, I felt like the space belonged to me. The phone rang throughout that first day. Sarah called 6 times. Michael called twice, clearly having been recruited by his sister to talk sense into me. My ex-husband even called, his voice dripping with false concern as he told me I was overreacting, that Sarah was just trying to help me manage my assets. The family had closed ranks, just as they always did when their access to my resources was threatened. But I didn't answer any of the calls. Instead, I did something I hadn't done in years. I took a bath. A long, luxurious bath with expensive salts and oils, while classical music played from the speakers mounted in my bathroom ceiling. I read a book, an actual book, not just financial statements or legal documents. I ordered dinner from my favorite restaurant and ate it slowly, tasting every bite instead of rushing through meals while worrying about family drama. It was during this peaceful interlude that I met Maria Fernandez. She lived in the apartment directly below mine, a warm widow in her 60s who had noticed the delivery trucks and couriers coming and going from my floor with increasing frequency. She knocked on my door 3 days after I had started saying no to my family, holding a plate covered with aluminum foil. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion," she said, her voice carrying the soft hint of an accent that spoke of Puerto Rican roots. "I made too many empanadas, and I thought you might like some." The kindness in her eyes was so unexpected, so genuine, that I nearly started crying right there in my doorway. When was the last time someone had brought me food just because they wanted to share something good? When was the last time someone knocked on my door without wanting something from me? "Would you like to come in for coffee?" I asked, and she smiled. We spent the afternoon talking. Really talking. She told me about her late husband, about her grandchildren who visited every Sunday, about her small apartment that felt full of love despite being a fraction of the size of my penthouse. I found myself telling her things I had never told anyone. About the loneliness that lived in my chest like a physical ache. About my children who only called when they needed money. About the forged lease papers that had finally opened my eyes to the truth. Maria listened without judgment, nodding at the right moments, offering comfort without trying to fix everything. When I finished talking, she reached across my dining table and took my hands in hers. "Mija," she said, using the Spanish endearment that somehow felt more loving than anything my family had said to me in years, "you don't owe anyone your happiness. Not even your children." Those words hit me like a revelation. I don't owe anyone my happiness. Not even my children. How had I forgotten that? When had I decided that being a good mother meant sacrificing my own well-being on the altar of their endless needs? Maria became a regular visitor, and I began to look forward to her knock on my door. She brought homemade meals and stories from her life, but more importantly, she brought perspective. She had raised 4 children as a single mother after her husband's death, working multiple jobs to keep them fed and housed. But she had also maintained boundaries. She had said no when necessary. She had demanded respect even from her own children. "Love doesn't mean being a doormat," she told me one afternoon as we shared café con leche and watched the sun set over Central Park. "Real love includes respect." Meanwhile, my family's reaction to my newfound boundaries escalated. Michael finally called me directly, his voice tight with anger. "What has gotten into you, Mom?" "Sarah is devastated. She says you accused her of some crazy scheme to steal your apartment." "It's not crazy, Michael. I have documents proving she tried to lease my home without my permission." "That's impossible. Sarah wouldn't do that." The blind loyalty my children showed each other, while refusing to show me even basic courtesy, was startling. They would defend each other's worst behavior while treating me like an unreasonable stranger. "Whether you believe it or not doesn't change the facts," I told him. "I'm not giving either of you any more money until you can treat me with respect." The phone went silent, then Michael's voice returned, colder than I had ever heard it. "Fine. But don't come crying to us when you're old and alone and need help." The threat was clear. Behave, or be abandoned. It was emotional blackmail of the cruelest kind, designed to prey on every fear I had about aging and dying alone. The old me would have crumbled, apologized, written another check. But something had hardened inside me during those peaceful days with Maria's friendship and my own space to think clearly. "I'd rather be alone than be surrounded by people who only love my bank account," I said, and hung up. The weeks that followed were a strange mixture of peace and pain. My phone stopped ringing constantly. The stream of requests for money dried up. My apartment felt different, lighter somehow, as if all the emotional weight I had been carrying had finally been lifted from the rooms themselves. I rearranged furniture, bought fresh flowers for myself, started playing music during the day instead of sitting in silence. But I also grieved. I grieved for the relationships I thought I had with my children. I grieved for the family dinners that had never felt warm, for the holidays that had always felt like performances. I grieved for my younger self, who had believed that giving everything would eventually result in receiving something meaningful in return. Maria helped me through the worst of it. She would arrive with tissues and tea when the sadness felt overwhelming. She would sit with me while I cried, never telling me to get over it or move on, just holding space for my pain. She understood that healing isn't linear, that some days would be harder than others. It was Maria who suggested I see a lawyer. Not for revenge, she was careful to clarify, but for protection. If Sarah had been willing to forge my signature once, what would stop her from doing it again? What other financial vulnerabilities did I have that I hadn't considered? The law office of Henderson, Martinez and Associates occupied the 32nd floor of a building in Midtown, all glass and steel and serious-looking people in expensive suits. I had never needed a lawyer for personal matters before. My late uncle's attorney had handled the inheritance, and a financial advisor managed my investments. But this felt different. This felt like preparing for war. Janet Martinez, a sharp woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a firm handshake, listened to my story without interruption. She examined the forged lease papers with a magnifying glass, making notes on a legal pad. When I finished explaining everything, she leaned back in her chair and studied me carefully. Mrs. Richardson, I have to ask you something difficult. Are you prepared for your children to escalate their behavior? Because once we put legal protections in place, they're going to realize they've lost access to your assets. Some families handle this gracefully. Others don't. I thought about Michael's threat, about Sarah's cold manipulation, about years of being treated like an ATM machine with motherly obligations. I'm prepared, I said, and meant it. We spent the next 2 hours going through my finances, my properties, my investments. Janet recommended changes to my will, new power of attorney documents, restrictions on access to my accounts. She suggested I consider a trust that would provide for my children after my death but prevent them from accessing the principal during my lifetime. Every suggestion was designed to protect me from the very people who should have been protecting me. Signing those documents felt like reclaiming my life. Each signature was an act of self-preservation, a declaration that I mattered, that my well-being was worth defending. As I initialed page after page, I felt myself growing stronger, more centered, more certain that I was making the right choice. The city outside Janet's office window buzzed with afternoon traffic. Yellow cabs honked their way through the streets, people hurried along sidewalks with purpose and determination. I had forgotten that I was still part of that world, still a participant in life rather than just an observer from my penthouse window. The sounds of Manhattan, distant sirens, construction noise, the general hum of 8 million people living their lives, reminded me that my story wasn't over. It was just beginning a new chapter. But my family wasn't going to let me disappear quietly into a peaceful retirement. 2 weeks after my meeting with Janet, Sarah demanded a face-to-face conversation. She suggested we meet at a small cafe in Midtown, neutral territory where we could talk without the emotional weight of being in either of our homes. I almost said no. The thought of sitting across from her, seeing her face as she continued to lie and manipulate, made my stomach turn. But Maria convinced me to go. You need to see who she really is when she can't hide behind phone calls and text messages, she said. Sometimes we need that final confirmation to fully let go. The cafe was one of those generic places that serves overpriced coffee to tourists and business people who needed a quick caffeine fix. Nothing on the walls, unremarkable music, the kind of place where conversations disappeared into the ambient noise. Perfect for what I suspected would be our final mother-daughter conversation. Sarah arrived 15 minutes late, dressed in the designer clothes I had paid for, carrying the handbag I had given her for her birthday. She looked beautiful and polished and completely unfamiliar to me. When had I stopped recognizing my own daughter? When had she become this stranger who wore my generosity like a costume? Mom, she said, settling into the chair across from me with a practiced smile. I'm so glad we're doing this. I've been worried about you. The manipulation started immediately. She was worried about me. As if I were the problem. As if my refusal to enable her theft was a sign of mental decline rather than mental health. I'm fine, Sarah. Better than I've been in years, actually. Her smile faltered slightly. That's good to hear. But I have to tell you, Michael and I are concerned about these accusations you've been making. About the apartment? It's so unlike you to be suspicious of your own family. I pulled the rental agreements from my purse and placed them on the table between us. Her eyes flicked to the papers, and for just a moment, I saw something that might have been guilt cross her face. But it disappeared so quickly I couldn't be sure. These are rental agreements for my penthouse. With your signature and a forgery of mine. What explanation do you have for this? She leaned forward, her face a perfect mask of concern and confusion. Mom, I told you. This has to be identity theft. Someone is trying to steal from both of us. We should go to the police together. The lies flowed so smoothly, so convincingly, that I almost doubted myself. Almost. But I had spent weeks preparing for this moment, weeks building up my resolve with Maria's help and Janet's legal advice. Sarah, I know what your real signature looks like. I've been signing birthday cards and permission slips and checks with your name on them since you were 5 years old. This is your signature. Something shifted in her expression then. The mask of concern cracked slightly, revealing something harder underneath. Fine. Yes, I signed some papers. But it was just exploratory. I was trying to help you generate more income from the apartment. You rattle around in that huge place all by yourself. It seemed wasteful. There it was. The truth, finally, buried under layers of justification and rationalization. She hadn't been stealing from me. She had been helping me. By forging my signature and attempting to lease my home without my knowledge or consent. And you didn't think to discuss this with me first? To ask if I wanted help generating income from my own property? You would have said no. You always say no to good business opportunities. You're too conservative with money. The irony was breathtaking. I was too conservative with the money I had earned and saved and invested wisely for decades. Money that had allowed me to provide for her every desire since childhood. Money that I was apparently managing incorrectly because I wasn't willing to let her steal it from me. What I do with my money and my property is my decision, Sarah. Not yours. Her composure began to crack in earnest then. The sweet, concerned daughter act was being replaced by someone I barely recognized. Her voice got sharper, her posture more aggressive. Your money? Mom, where do you think you'd be without us? Who do you think is going to take care of you when you get older? When you can't manage on your own anymore? We're your family. We're the only people who will ever really love you. The emotional blackmail was expertly deployed. Fear of aging, fear of abandonment, fear of being unlovable, she hit every vulnerable spot with surgical precision. But instead of collapsing under the weight of these threats, I felt something unexpected: anger. Pure, clean anger at being manipulated. Anger at being threatened. Anger at having my love taken for granted and my generosity exploited. Anger at being told that stealing from me was somehow an act of love. If this is what love looks like, I said, my voice steady despite the emotion building inside me, then I'd rather be alone. Sarah's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Surprise, anger, calculation, then a kind of cold fury I had never seen from her before. You'll regret this, Mom. When you're sitting in that apartment by yourself with no one to talk to, no one to visit, no one who cares whether you live or die, you'll remember this conversation. You'll remember that you chose money over family. She stood up abruptly, grabbing her purse from the table. But I wasn't finished. I reached into my own purse and pulled out something I had brought specifically for this moment. A framed photograph of Sarah and me from her college graduation. She was smiling broadly, her arms around my shoulders, both of us looking happy and proud and connected. With deliberate calm, I tore the photograph carefully in half. The sound of ripping paper cut through the background noise of the cafe. Several people at nearby tables turned to stare. Sarah's mouth fell open in shock, her eyes wide with disbelief. I will no longer buy love, I said, my voice carrying clearly across the small space. Respect me or lose me. The silence stretched between us like a canyon. Sarah stood frozen, her face cycling through emotions too quickly for me to track. Finally, she leaned down and whispered, her voice full of venom, "You're going to die alone and forgotten. And when you do, don't expect us to care." She turned and walked out of the cafe, leaving me sitting alone with the torn photograph and the stares of curious strangers. But instead of feeling devastated, I felt liberated. The word she had intended as a curse, alone, suddenly sounded like a promise. Alone meant free. Alone meant peaceful. Alone meant I could finally stop performance being the grateful mother to ungrateful children. I carefully placed both halves of the photograph in my purse. Not because I wanted to keep them, but because I didn't want to leave them scattered on the table for strangers to see. Even in my anger, even in my liberation, I had been trained to clean up messes that weren't entirely my own. The walk back to my apartment was surreal. The October afternoon was crisp and clear, the kind of weather that made New York feel like the most beautiful city in the world. Leaves crunched under my feet as I crossed through Central Park, and for the first time in years, I noticed the details around me. The way the sunlight filtered through the nearly bare branches. The sound of children playing on a distant playground. The smell of hot chestnuts from a street vendor. I wasn't checking my phone every few minutes, waiting for the next crisis or request or manipulation. I wasn't mentally calculating how much money I might need to solve someone else's problems. I was just walking through the park, breathing fresh air, feeling the incredible lightness of having finally spoken my truth. But my family wasn't done with me yet. Over the next few weeks, the pressure campaign intensified. Michael called repeatedly, leaving increasingly aggressive voicemails about my ungrateful attitude and unreasonable behavior. My ex-husband somehow got my new phone number and called to inform me that I was having some kind of mental breakdown and needed professional help. Mutual friends began reaching out with carefully worded questions about my well-being, clearly having been fed information designed to make me look unstable. The message was clear: fall in line, or be painted as crazy. But I had Maria, and I had Janet Martinez, and most importantly, I had finally found my own voice. When Michael showed up at my apartment building unannounced, demanding to speak with me, I had the doorman turn him away. When my ex-husband sent a threatening letter about having me declared mentally incompetent, I forwarded it to Janet, who responded with legal language that shut down that avenue of attack immediately. The attempts at manipulation became more sophisticated. Sarah sent me a long email detailing all the ways I had failed as a mother, how my selfishness had damaged her ability to form healthy relationships, how refusing to help her financially was just the latest example of my emotional neglect. The email was cruel and calculated, designed to make me doubt myself and return to the familiar role of the apologetic mother desperate to make amends. I read it once, then deleted it. I didn't respond. I didn't try to defend myself or explain my side of the story. I simply refused to engage with the drama they were trying to create around my decision to protect myself. Instead, I focused on building a life that was actually mine. Maria and I had coffee every Tuesday and Friday, sometimes at her apartment, sometimes at mine, sometimes at small cafes in the neighborhood. She introduced me to her book club, a group of women our age who met monthly to discuss literature and life with equal passion. I hadn't read fiction in years, too busy managing family crises and financial obligations. But diving back into novels felt like coming home to a part of myself I had forgotten existed. I started taking long walks through different neighborhoods, exploring parts of Manhattan I had never seen despite living there for 15 years. I discovered small museums and art galleries, attended lectures at the public library, went to matinee Broadway shows by myself and loved every minute of the solitude. My apartment began to reflect these changes. I moved the furniture around, creating conversation areas instead of the formal living spaces that had always felt like a showroom. I hung new artwork on the walls, pieces I chose because I loved them, not because they impressed visitors. I filled the space with plants and books and music, transforming it from a monument to my wealth into a home that actually felt like mine. The silence from my family was initially unnerving, then peaceful, then genuinely liberating. No more late-night phone calls about financial emergencies. No more guilt trips about my responsibilities as a mother and grandmother. No more walking on eggshells to avoid triggering the next crisis that would somehow become my fault to solve. But just when I thought I had reached some kind of equilibrium, Sarah made one final play for control. It started with whispers. Maria heard it first, from her neighbor who worked as a secretary at a medical office in the area. Someone had been asking questions about my mental state, suggesting that I had become paranoid and unstable, that I was making wild accusations against my own family. The person making these inquiries had claimed to be concerned about my welfare, worried that I might be showing signs of dementia or psychological decline. Then came the phone calls to my building management. Anonymous tips that I was behaving erratically, that there were concerns about my ability to live independently. The building manager, who had known me for years as a quiet, reliable tenant, was confused by these reports. But they were required to take safety concerns seriously, especially regarding elderly residents. Finally, I received a call from Adult Protective Services. A caseworker named David Chen explained that they had received multiple reports about my well-being from concerned family members. They needed to schedule a wellness check to ensure I was safe and capable of caring for myself. The manipulation was masterful. By positioning herself as the concerned daughter worried about her mother's declining mental health, Sarah had found a way to potentially regain control over my life and assets. If I were declared mentally incompetent, she could petition for guardianship. She could gain access to everything I had spent the last few months protecting. But I was no longer the woman who crumbled under pressure. I was no longer the mother who believed that family loyalty meant accepting any kind of treatment. I had spent months building strength and clarity with Maria's friendship and Janet's legal guidance. I was prepared for this. When David Chen arrived at my apartment for the wellness check, he found me dressed professionally, my apartment spotless and organized, my financial and legal documents neatly organized and easily accessible. I walked him through my daily routine, showed him my social activities with Maria and the book club, demonstrated my mental acuity by discussing current events and complex financial concepts. I provided contact information for Janet Martinez, who could verify that I had recently made important legal decisions with complete competence and understanding. Most importantly, I showed him the forged lease documents and explained the entire situation calmly and methodically. I didn't rant or rave about my ungrateful children. I simply presented the facts. My daughter had attempted to forge my signature on legal documents. I had discovered this fraud and taken steps to protect myself legally and financially, and my family had responded by launching a campaign to have me declared mentally incompetent. David Chen was a kind man in his 30s who had clearly seen this kind of family manipulation before. He spent 2 hours with me, asking questions, observing my demeanor, reviewing my living situation. At the end of his visit, He was satisfied that I was fully competent and capable of independent living. "Mrs. Richardson," he said as he prepared to leave, "I have to tell you, these false reports about elderly abuse are unfortunately common. Adult children sometimes use our services as a weapon when they're not getting what they want from their parents. I'm going to note in my report that you are clearly competent and that future reports from these particular family members should be viewed with skepticism." After he left, I sat in my living room feeling a mixture of emotions I couldn't quite name. Relief, certainly. Vindication. But also a profound sadness that it had come to this. That my own children had been willing to have me declared mentally incompetent in order to regain access to my money. That evening, Maria came upstairs with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. "I heard about the visit today," she said, settling into my favorite chair like she belonged there. "How are you feeling?" "I feel like I finally see them clearly," I said. "All these years, I thought they were just selfish or immature or maybe going through difficult phases. But this was calculated cruelty. This was an attempt to destroy my independence and autonomy because I wouldn't let them steal from me." Maria nodded, pouring wine into both glasses. "Some people become different creatures when money is involved. Even people we love. Even people we raised." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the lights come on in the buildings visible from my windows. The city spread out below us like a constellation, millions of people living their own complicated stories of love and loss and family drama. "What happens now?" Maria asked. "Now I live my life," I said. "Really live it, for the first time in years." And that's exactly what I did. I enrolled in a watercolor painting class at a small studio in Soho. I had always been drawn to art but had never made time for creative pursuits. The instructor was a patient woman named Elena who had immigrated from Italy and spoke about color and light like they were old friends. Our class was small, 6 women all over 60 who had decided to try something new. The first time I held a brush loaded with cerulean blue and watched it blend with titanium white on paper, I felt something unlock inside my chest. I wasn't thinking about phone calls I needed to return or money I needed to send or family drama I needed to mediate. I was just present in the moment, focused on the simple pleasure of creating something beautiful. My classmates were a revelation. Dorothy had been a high school principal before retirement and now spent her time volunteering at literacy programs. Helen had raised 5 children and was finally pursuing the art degree she had abandoned decades earlier. Anna had worked as a nurse for 40 years and was learning to paint the gardens she had never had time to tend while she was busy caring for others. We were all women who had spent most of our lives taking care of other people. And now, finally, we were taking care of ourselves. The studio became my sanctuary. 3 afternoons a week, I would take the subway downtown, yes, the subway, something I hadn't done in years, and immerse myself in the world of brushes and pigments and possibility. Elena encouraged us to paint our memories, our dreams, our fears. I found myself creating images I didn't know were inside me. Landscapes that looked like the Brooklyn neighborhood where I had raised my children, but softer somehow, more forgiving. Portraits of faces that might have been my mother or my grandmother or my own reflection decades from now. My apartment began to fill with my artwork. The walls that had once displayed expensive prints chosen by interior designers now held watercolor paintings that captured moments and feelings I had thought were lost forever. The colors were bright and bold and joyful, a stark contrast to the muted, safe palette that had dominated my home for years. Maria loved the paintings and convinced me to frame several of them properly. We spent an afternoon at a small frame shop in the village, and the elderly man who ran the store treated my amateur watercolors like they were precious treasures worth preserving. When he handed me the first framed piece, I almost cried. There was something so validating about seeing my own creativity treated with respect and care. My friendship with Maria deepened during these months of rebuilding. She was everything I had thought family was supposed to be: reliable, supportive, interested in my well-being without expecting anything in return. When I had a bad day, she brought soup and stayed to listen. When I had a good day, she celebrated with me like my happiness was her own victory. We took day trips to small towns outside the city, explored museums together, tried restaurants in neighborhoods we had never visited. She never asked me for money. Never hinted about financial difficulties or suggested business investments. Never made me feel guilty for having more than she did. She was simply my friend, and I was hers, and that was enough. For the first time in decades, I understood what healthy relationships felt like. My life took on a rhythm that was entirely my own. Tuesday watercolor classes. Thursday book club meetings. Weekend adventures with Maria. Long walks through Central Park when the weather was nice. Evenings spent reading or listening to music or simply sitting by my windows watching the city move through its daily cycles. I bought new clothes, not the conservative, expensive outfits I had worn for years, but colorful dresses and comfortable shoes and scarves that made me feel vibrant and alive. I changed my hairstyle from the severe bob I had maintained for a decade to something softer and more flattering. I started wearing jewelry because I liked how it looked, not because it signaled my financial status to others. The woman in my bathroom mirror looked different. Younger somehow, despite being the same age. Her eyes were brighter, her posture straighter, her expression more peaceful. She looked like someone who was living her own life instead of performing a role for an unwilling audience. But the real transformation was internal. The constant anxiety that had lived in my chest for years was gone. The hypervigilance that had made me jump every time my phone rang had disappeared. I no longer woke up each morning wondering what crisis I would be expected to solve or what price I would pay for failing to meet someone else's expectations. I slept deeply and woke up refreshed. I ate meals slowly and actually tasted my food. I listened to music and felt the emotions it evoked instead of using it as background noise to distract from my sadness. I was present in my own life in a way I hadn't been since before my children were born. The seasons changed, and I changed with them. Winter came to New York with its magical transformation of the city into a wonderland of snow and holiday lights. I attended holiday performances at Lincoln Center, not because I was trying to impress anyone, but because I genuinely loved the music. I volunteered at a soup kitchen on Christmas Eve, serving meals to people who had even less family support than I did. Their gratitude for a warm meal and a kind word reminded me that there were many ways to experience love and connection beyond the traditional family structure. Spring brought new beginnings in the most literal sense. My watercolor skills had improved enough that Elena suggested I enter a piece in a local art show for amateur artists. The thought terrified and thrilled me in equal measure. When had I last done anything just for the joy of creation? When had I last taken a risk that wasn't calculated to benefit someone else? I chose a painting I had done of Central Park in autumn, with golden light filtering through nearly bare trees and people walking along paths that curved out of sight. It wasn't technically perfect, but it captured something true about the peace I had found in walking through that park during my months of transformation. The night of the art show, Maria came with me for moral support. We dressed up like we were going to a gallery opening at the Metropolitan Museum, and in a way, that's how it felt. My little watercolor was hanging on the wall alongside dozens of other amateur works, photographs and sculptures and paintings created by people who had decided to express themselves despite having no formal training or artistic credentials. I didn't win any prizes, but I sold the painting to a young couple who said it reminded them of their first date walking through Central Park. Taking their money felt strange and wonderful. Someone had paid for something I had created, something that had come from my own hands and heart and vision. It was the first money I had earned in years that had nothing to do with inheritance or investments or financial management. It was money I had earned by sharing a piece of my soul. That night, Maria and I celebrated at a small wine bar near the gallery. We toasted to new beginnings, to courage, to the possibility of reinvention at any age. I thought about Sarah and Michael, wondered if they would be proud of me if they knew about the art show. Then I realized it didn't matter. I was proud of me, and that was enough. Summer brought longer days and more opportunities for adventure. Maria and I took weekend trips to small towns along the Hudson River, exploring antique shops and farm stands and bed and breakfast inns that catered to guests our age who were interested in scenery and good food rather than nightlife and excitement. We rode trains through the countryside and marveled at how different the world looked when you weren't racing through it in a car or flying over it in an airplane. I started gardening on my penthouse terrace, something I had never attempted despite having one of the most beautiful outdoor spaces in Manhattan. Elena had encouraged all of us to paint outdoors when weather permitted, and I discovered that I loved being surrounded by growing things while I worked. I planted herbs and flowers and small vegetables in containers, creating a miniature oasis 30 floors above the street. The act of nurturing something from seed to full growth was deeply satisfying in ways I hadn't expected. Watching tomatoes ripen and basil flourish under my care gave me the same sense of accomplishment I had once gotten from solving my children's problems. But these plants flourished because of my attention, not in spite of it. They didn't resent my care or take it for granted. They simply grew and bloomed and produced fruit, a perfect cycle of giving and receiving. By the time autumn returned, I had been living my new life for almost a year. The anniversary of that terrible Tuesday when the lease papers arrived felt like a milestone worth marking. I had survived the destruction of my family relationships and built something better in their place. I had learned that love without respect is not love at all. I had discovered that I was more resilient and creative and capable than I had ever imagined. I was sitting by my living room window on a Sunday afternoon, reading a novel from our book club selection while classical music played softly in the background, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Sarah's name. I hadn't heard from her in months. For a moment, I considered not answering. The woman I had been a year ago would have jumped to answer, heart racing with hope that maybe this call would be different, maybe this time she was calling just to say hello and see how I was doing. But the woman I had become knew better. I answered on the fourth ring, my voice calm and neutral. "Hello, Sarah. Mom." Her voice sounded different somehow. Smaller. Less certain. "How are you?" "I'm well, thank you." "How are you?" There was a long pause, and I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. I waited, refusing to fill the silence with nervous chatter or eager questions about her life. "I've been thinking," she finally said. "About our last conversation. About the things I said to you. I wanted to call and... I don't know. Maybe we could try again. Maybe we could work things out." The old me would have collapsed with relief. The old me would have started crying and apologizing and promising to do better, to be the mother she needed me to be. The old me would have offered money and forgiveness and a fresh start with no questions asked. But I had learned the difference between genuine reconciliation and manipulation disguised as an apology. "What would working things out look like to you, Sarah?" I asked. Another pause. "I don't know. Maybe we could have dinner. Talk about things. I miss you, Mom." Those 3 words, "I miss you," were designed to crack open my carefully constructed defenses. And they did hurt, because despite everything, I missed her too. I missed the daughter I thought I had, the one who existed in old photographs and childhood memories. But I didn't miss the woman who had tried to steal my home and then attempted to have me declared mentally incompetent when I fought back. "I miss you too," I said honestly. "But I need you to understand that things would have to be very different between us for me to consider rebuilding our relationship. I won't go back to the way things were." "What do you mean?" "I mean no more loans or gifts of money without clear terms and expectations. No more decisions made about my property or my life without my explicit consent. No more emotional manipulation when I say no to something. If you want a relationship with me, it has to be based on mutual respect, not financial dependency." The silence stretched so long I wondered if she had hung up. When she finally spoke, her voice had that familiar edge of anger creeping back in. "So you're saying you'll only love me if I never ask you for help again?" "I'm saying I'll only have a relationship with you if you treat me like a person instead of a bank account." "That's not fair, Mom. I'm your daughter. Family helps family." "That's what family means." And there it was. The fundamental difference in how we defined family. To her, family meant unlimited access to my resources with no accountability for her behavior. To me, family meant love and respect and consideration for each other's boundaries and well-being. "Family also means treating each other with kindness and honesty," I said. "It means not forging signatures on legal documents. It means not trying to have your mother declared mentally incompetent when she refuses to be stolen from." Another long pause. Then her voice changed again, becoming harder, more familiar. "I can't believe you're still hung up on that apartment thing. I told you, I was trying to help you maximize your income. But fine, if you want to be stubborn and paranoid and push away everyone who loves you, go ahead. Just don't come crying to me when you're lonely and miserable." "I won't," I said calmly. "Take care of yourself, Sarah." I hung up before she could respond. My hands were shaking slightly, but not from fear or doubt. From adrenaline. From the rush of standing up for myself again, of refusing to be drawn back into patterns that had nearly destroyed my sense of self-worth. I looked around my apartment, filled with my artwork and my books and my plants and the artifacts of a life I had built for myself. The silence that had once felt oppressive now felt peaceful. I wasn't lonely. I was alone by choice, surrounded by people and activities that brought me joy instead of stress. That evening, Maria came upstairs for our weekly dinner together. I told her about Sarah's call, about the familiar attempts at manipulation disguised as reconciliation. "How do you feel about it?" she asked, serving us both generous portions of the paella she had made. "Sad," I said honestly. "But not tempted." A year ago, I would have agreed to dinner and convinced myself that maybe things could be different this time. Now I know better. "You've learned the most important lesson anyone can learn," Maria said. "You've learned your own worth." As winter approached again, I reflected on everything that had changed in my life. The penthouse that had once felt like a prison now felt like a sanctuary. The solitude that had once seemed like punishment now felt like freedom. The independence that had once frightened me now felt like strength. I had lost my family, but I had found myself. I had given up the illusion of love based on financial dependency and discovered what genuine affection felt like through friendships that asked nothing of me except that I show up authentically. My days were full of small pleasures and meaningful activities. Morning coffee while watching the sunrise over Central Park. Afternoon painting sessions where I lost track of time. Evening conversations with Maria about books and life and the small adventures we were planning for the future. Weekend visits to museums and galleries and theaters, cultural experiences I attended because they fed my soul, not because they impressed anyone else. I had learned to say no without guilt, to say yes without fear, to make decisions based on my own desires rather than other people's expectations. I had discovered that respect from others begins with self-respect, that boundaries aren't walls that keep love out but frameworks that allow love to flourish safely. Most importantly, I had learned that family is not defined by blood or legal documents or historical obligation. Family is defined by mutual care, consistent kindness, and the choice to love someone not for what they can provide but for who they are. On a quiet Sunday afternoon in December, almost 18 months after that first terrible betrayal, I sat in my favorite chair with a cup of tea and the Sunday newspaper. Snow was beginning to fall outside my windows, dusting Central Park with white like powdered sugar on a cake. The apartment was warm and peaceful, decorated with my own artwork and filled with the scent of the bread Maria had helped me learn to bake. My phone sat silently on the table beside me, no longer a source of anxiety or dread. I had control over who had access to me, and I used that control wisely. The people who called me now called because they enjoyed my company, not because they needed something from me. I thought about the woman I had been 2 years ago, living in the same apartment but feeling trapped and used and desperately lonely despite being surrounded by family members who claimed to love me. That woman had mistaken being needed for being loved, had confused financial dependency with family bonds, had believed that setting boundaries was the same as being cruel. I didn't regret the pain that had led me to this peace. Without the betrayal, I never would have found the courage to change. Without losing the family I thought I had, I never would have discovered the family I actually deserved. Without hitting the bottom of that particular kind of despair, I never would have learned how high I could climb. The sun was setting behind the Manhattan skyline, casting everything in golden light that reminded me of my favorite watercolor techniques. I could paint this scene, I thought. I could capture this moment of perfect contentment and hang it on my wall as a reminder of what I had built from the ashes of what I had lost. I raised my teacup in a silent toast to the woman I had become, to the courage it had taken to choose myself over the comfort of familiar dysfunction, to the peace that came from living authentically rather than performing for an audience that never appreciated the show anyway. As I sit here now, sharing this story with you, I want you to understand that transformation is possible at any age, under any circumstances. You don't have to accept treatment that diminishes your worth or sacrifices your well-being for other people's comfort. You don't have to buy love with money or tolerate disrespect from family members or anyone else. Your happiness matters. Your boundaries matter. Your peace of mind is not a luxury you have to earn through suffering, it's a basic requirement for a life worth living. If someone in your life only shows up when they need something from you, that's not love. If someone manipulates you with guilt and threats when you try to protect yourself, that's not family. If someone makes you feel guilty for having boundaries or saying no or taking care of your own needs, that person is not good for your well-being. Real love enhances your life instead of draining it. Real family respects your choices even when they don't understand them. Real relationships are built on mutual care and consideration, not one-sided giving that leaves you empty while filling someone else up. I learned that I could survive the loss of people I thought I couldn't live without. More than survive, I could thrive. I could build a life so rich and meaningful that their absence became a gift rather than a tragedy. The penthouse where I once felt like a prisoner became my kingdom. The solitude I once feared became my sanctuary. The independence I once thought was terrifying became the foundation for everything good that followed. Have you ever experienced something like this? Have you found yourself giving and giving to family members who only take, who only call when they need something, who make you feel guilty for having boundaries or wanting respect? Maybe you're living through it right now. Maybe you're the one making excuses for people who treat you poorly because you share DNA or legal connections or a history that once meant something beautiful. I want you to know that you don't have to accept crumbs and call it love. You don't have to financially support people who emotionally abandon you. You don't have to tolerate disrespect from anyone, including your own children. You are worth more than that. Your peace is worth protecting. Your happiness is worth fighting for, even if you have to fight the people who are supposed to care about it most. Tell me in the comments, have you lived through something similar? Do you know someone who has? How did it change you, or how do you think it might change you to finally put yourself first? But the story doesn't end there. As months passed and I continued to build my new life, something unexpected happened. Michael, my son, began reaching out in ways that were different from his previous patterns. At first, I was skeptical. Too many years of manipulation had taught me to be cautious about sudden changes in behavior from my children. It started with a simple email. No requests for money, no emergencies that needed my immediate attention. Just a message asking how I was doing, mentioning that he had heard through mutual friends that I seemed to be doing well. The tone was different, tentative, almost humble. It was so unlike the demanding, entitled communications I had grown accustomed to that I read it several times before responding. I kept my reply brief and neutral. Polite, but not encouraging. I told him I was doing well and asked about his work. That was all. I wasn't ready to open myself up to more disappointment, but I also wasn't going to be unnecessarily cruel. His response surprised me. He wrote about his work, about some books he had been reading, about a documentary he thought I might find interesting. There were no hints about financial difficulties. No mentions of past grievances or attempts to manipulate me into feeling guilty about my boundaries. It was just conversation. This exchange continued for several weeks. Short emails back and forth, nothing too personal or emotionally charged, but civil and adult. I found myself looking forward to these messages, despite my wariness. They reminded me of the son I had raised, before money and entitlement had corrupted our relationship. Maria noticed the change in my mood during one of our Tuesday coffee sessions. "You seem lighter somehow today," she observed, pouring café con leche into our favorite cups. "Something good happen?" I told her about Michael's emails, about the cautious hope I was feeling despite myself. She listened carefully, as she always did, her dark eyes thoughtful. "How does it make you feel?" she asked. "Not how you think you should feel, or how you're afraid to feel. How does it actually make you feel?" I considered the question carefully. "Hopeful," I admitted. "And terrified. I don't want to go back to the way things were. But I miss him. The real him, the one I thought I knew before everything went wrong." "Then maybe," Maria said gently, "you could consider meeting him. Not at your apartment, not somewhere that feels too intimate or charged with history. Somewhere neutral, where you could see if this change is real or just another strategy." The idea both attracted and terrified me. What if it was real? What if Michael had genuinely learned something from our estrangement? What if he was ready to have an adult relationship based on mutual respect rather than financial dependency? But what if it wasn't? What if this was just a more sophisticated form of manipulation, designed to get past my newly constructed defenses? I spent days wrestling with the decision. I talked with Elena during one of our painting sessions, her wise Italian perspective helping me see things from different angles. I discussed it with the women in our book club, all of whom had complicated relationships with their own adult children. Dorothy, the former principal, shared a story about one of her own sons who had gone through a similar pattern of demanding money and then disappearing from her life. "It took him 5 years," she said, "but eventually he came back. Really came back, not just looking for more handouts. Sometimes people need to lose something before they understand its value." Helen, who had raised 5 children, was more cautious. "Trust, once broken, takes a long time to rebuild," she warned. "Don't be afraid to move slowly. Don't be afraid to maintain your boundaries even if he seems different." Anna, the former nurse, offered the most practical advice. "Meet him in a public place. Give yourself an easy way out if things go badly. But also give yourself permission to hope. Complete cynicism is just as limiting as complete trust." After 2 weeks of consideration, I sent Michael an email. I suggested we meet for coffee at a cafe in Midtown, somewhere neutral and public. I made it clear that this was just coffee, not a commitment to anything more. I also made it clear that my boundaries hadn't changed. I wasn't interested in discussing money or being drawn into family drama. His response was immediate and eager, but still respectful of the limitations I had set. He agreed to the cafe I had chosen, the time I had suggested, the terms I had outlined. There was something in his tone that reminded me of the young man who had once called me just to tell me about his day, before our relationship had become transactional and painful. The night before our meeting, I barely slept. I changed my outfit 3 times, as if the right combination of clothes could somehow protect me from disappointment or manipulation. I practiced conversations in my head, thinking about what I would say if he asked for money, how I would respond if he tried to guilt me about Sarah, what I would do if his apparent change of heart turned out to be just another way to access my resources. But when I walked into the cafe and saw him sitting at a corner table, something in his posture told me this was different. He wasn't on his phone, wasn't checking his watch impatiently, wasn't wearing the expensive clothes I had paid for like a costume designed to impress me. He looked smaller somehow. Less certain. More human. He stood when he saw me, and for a moment we just looked at each other across the small space. He had lost weight since I had last seen him, and there were lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and difficult realizations. He looked like someone who had been through something hard and emerged changed by it. "Mom," he said simply, and there was none of the performative warmth I had grown so tired of. Just my name, said with what sounded like genuine emotion. "Hello, Michael." I kept my voice neutral, but not cold. I was prepared to be civil, even friendly, but I wasn't ready to pretend that nothing had happened between us. We ordered coffee and pastries, making small talk about the weather and the cafe while we settled into our chairs. The conversation felt awkward, but not hostile. We were like strangers trying to figure out how to connect, which in many ways, we were. Finally, when our coffee arrived and we had exhausted the safe topics, Michael took a deep breath and looked directly at me. "I owe you an apology," he said. "A real one. Not the kind where I say sorry and then explain why I was actually right to do what I did. A real apology where I take responsibility for how I treated you." I waited, saying nothing. I had heard too many fake apologies over the years to get excited about words alone. "I was wrong," he continued, his voice steady but quiet. "About so many things. The way I talked to you. The way I dismissed your feelings. The way I acted like you owed me whatever I wanted just because you were my mother. The way I supported Sarah even when I knew she was lying to you." This last confession hit me unexpectedly hard. I had known that my children defended each other's worst behavior, but hearing him acknowledge it directly was both painful and relieving. "I knew about the apartment thing," he said, and I felt my breath catch. "Sarah told me what she was planning. She said you were getting too old to manage your own affairs, that someone needed to help you make better financial decisions. I didn't try to stop her. I thought maybe she was right." The honesty was brutal and welcome at the same time. Finally, someone was telling me the truth about what had happened, about how my own children had conspired against me. It hurt, but it also validated everything I had suspected. "What changed?" I asked. "Why are you telling me this now?" Michael was quiet for a long moment, stirring sugar into his coffee with unnecessary concentration. When he finally looked up, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I lost my job," he said. 3 months ago. Budget cuts. They eliminated my entire department. I was furious. I felt betrayed, like after everything I had given to that company, they had just thrown me away like I didn't matter." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "I spent weeks being angry at them. Complaining to my friends, my girlfriend, anyone who would listen. About how ungrateful they were. How they had used me and then discarded me without any regard for my feelings or my contributions. I could see where this was going, and despite everything, I felt a small flutter of hope in my chest. And then one day, I was talking to my friend Dave about it, and he just looked at me and said, 'Isn't that exactly what you did to your mother?'" Michael's voice cracked slightly. And suddenly I could see it. How I had treated you like the company treated me. Like you existed solely to provide whatever I needed, and when you finally said no, I got angry at you for being ungrateful. The tears were flowing freely now, and he didn't try to stop them. "I realized I had never once asked you how you were feeling. Not really. I never asked if you were happy, or lonely, or scared, or if you needed anything from me. I just showed up when I wanted something and disappeared when I had it. For years. And when you finally protected yourself from that cycle, I accused you of not loving me anymore." I sat quietly, watching my son cry in a public cafe over the kind of self-awareness I had waited decades for him to develop. Part of me wanted to comfort him, to reach across the table and take his hand like I had when he was small and scared. But another part of me was still protecting itself, still waiting to see if this insight would translate into actual change. "I understand if you don't want to forgive me," he said, wiping his eyes with a napkin. "I understand if you can't trust me. I broke something between us, and I don't know if it can be fixed. But I needed you to know that I see what I did. I needed you to know that you were right to protect yourself from me." This last statement undid me completely. After all those months of being told I was selfish, unreasonable, mentally unstable, paranoid, to hear my own son acknowledge that I had been right to defend myself was overwhelming. I started crying too, right there in the middle of the crowded cafe. Not the sad, desperate tears I had shed so many times over my broken family, but tears of relief. Relief that I hadn't been crazy or cruel. Relief that somewhere inside the entitled person my son had become, the child I had raised with love and hope was still alive. "I've missed you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I've missed the person you used to be. The person you were before money became the only thing we ever talked about." "I've missed you too," he said. "I've missed having a mother instead of just a financial safety net. I've missed talking to you about things that mattered. I've missed feeling like I was someone you were proud of instead of just someone whose hand was always out." We sat in silence for several minutes, both of us crying and not caring who saw us. The relief of honest emotion after so many years of careful performance was intoxicating. "Where do we go from here?" I asked eventually. "I don't know," Michael admitted. "I'd like to try to rebuild our relationship, if you're willing. But I know it has to be different. I know I have to earn back your trust. I know I can't just apologize and expect everything to go back to the way it was. No, I agreed. It can't go back. But maybe it can go forward. Maybe we can figure out what a healthy relationship between us looks like. I'd like that, he said. But I need you to know that I don't expect anything from you. No money, no help with my career, nothing. I need to figure out my own life, and I need to do it without using you as a safety net. That's the only way I'm going to develop into someone worth having a relationship with. This statement meant more to me than any apology could have. It showed me that he understood the fundamental problem with our previous dynamic, that his financial dependence on me had corrupted his ability to see me as a person rather than a resource. I think that's very wise, I said. And I think it will be better for both of us if we can relate to each other as adults rather than as parent and dependent child. We talked for another hour, carefully and tentatively beginning to explore what a new relationship might look like. We agreed to meet for coffee again in 2 weeks, somewhere neutral and public. No visits to each other's homes until we had rebuilt some trust. No discussions of finances or career help. Just conversations about books, movies, current events, the kinds of things people who enjoyed each other's company might talk about. As we prepared to leave, Michael hesitated, then asked the question I had been expecting and dreading. What about Sarah? Have you heard from her recently? I told him about her phone call, about her attempts to reconcile without actually changing anything about her behavior or apologizing for her actions. She's angry, Michael said. Really angry. She feels like you've abandoned the family, like you're punishing her for trying to help you. She can't see that what she did was wrong. Do you think she'll ever be able to see it? I asked. Michael shook his head sadly. I don't know. I hope so. But right now, she's convinced that you're the problem. She's convinced that if you would just go back to the way things were, everything would be fine. She can't understand why you won't apologize for protecting yourself. This news was disappointing but not surprising. Sarah had always been more skilled at manipulation than Michael, more committed to her version of reality even when evidence contradicted it. I'll keep hoping, I said. But I won't keep waiting. I won't put my life on hold indefinitely for someone who refuses to acknowledge that they hurt me. I think that's the right decision, Michael said. I think she needs to lose access to you completely before she'll be motivated to examine her own behavior. It's what I needed, apparently. We hugged goodbye outside the cafe, and it felt different from any embrace we had shared in years. Less performative, more genuine. Still fragile, still tentative, but real in a way that gave me hope. Over the next few months, Michael and I met regularly for coffee, gradually building something that resembled a functional adult relationship. He told me about his job search, his struggles with feeling like a failure at 35, his efforts to understand how he had become someone who felt entitled to other people's resources without giving anything back. I told him about my art classes, my friendship with Maria, my volunteer work, the life I had built for myself after discovering that I didn't need family approval to be happy. He seemed genuinely interested in these things, asking follow-up questions, remembering details from previous conversations, engaging with my life as something valuable in its own right rather than just background noise to his own concerns. Slowly, carefully, we began to trust each other again. Not the blind trust of parent and child, but the earned trust of adults who had chosen to invest in each other's well-being. It felt more stable, more realistic, less likely to be destroyed by disappointment or unmet expectations. But the healing process wasn't linear or simple. There were setbacks, moments when old patterns threatened to reassert themselves. Once, when Michael mentioned financial stress, I felt the familiar urge to solve his problems with money. The old dynamic was so deeply ingrained that my first instinct was still to write a check rather than offer emotional support. But I caught myself, and instead of offering money, I offered to listen. I asked questions about his feelings, his plans, his options. I treated him like an adult capable of solving his own problems rather than a child who needed me to fix everything for him. It was harder than writing a check, but it was also better. It allowed him to maintain his dignity while still feeling supported. It allowed me to care without enabling. It allowed both of us to practice relating to each other as equals rather than as benefactor and dependent. Michael noticed the difference and commented on it. You used to just throw money at my problems, he said during one of our coffee dates. It made me feel like you didn't think I was capable of handling anything on my own. Like you saw me as this perpetual child who needed constant rescuing. Did it feel good to be rescued? I asked, genuinely curious about his perspective on our old dynamic. In the moment, yes, he admitted. But afterward, I always felt smaller somehow. Like I had proven that I couldn't take care of myself. Like I was this failure of an adult who had to keep running to mommy for help. This insight helped me understand how our old pattern had been destructive for both of us. My constant rescuing had been intended as love, but it had actually undermined his confidence and independence. By treating him like someone who couldn't handle his own problems, I had inadvertently encouraged him to behave like someone who couldn't handle his own problems. I thought I was being a good mother, I said. I thought providing for your every need was showing love. It was love, Michael said. But it was love that didn't trust me to be an adult. And eventually, I stopped trusting myself to be an adult too. These conversations were painful but necessary. We were both learning to see how our old patterns had hurt us both, how the very things we had thought represented love between us had actually prevented real intimacy and respect. As our relationship continued to improve, Michael began sharing more about Sarah's ongoing anger and resentment. She had interpreted his reconciliation with me as a betrayal of their sibling bond. She had tried to convince him to stop seeing me, to present a united front against my unreasonable boundaries. She can't understand why I won't try to convince you to forgive her, Michael told me during one of our meetings. She thinks I should be working on her behalf to get you to go back to supporting her financially. What do you tell her? That she needs to have her own relationship with you, and I need to have mine. That I can't fix what's broken between you two. That if she wants a relationship with you, she needs to earn it the same way I'm earning it, by acknowledging the damage she caused and doing the work to change. I was proud of him for maintaining these boundaries with Sarah, for refusing to serve as a mediator or enabler in our broken relationship. It showed me that his growth was real, that he was committed to healthier patterns not just with me but in all his relationships. But it also meant that Sarah's isolation was becoming more complete. She had lost access to me, and now she was losing Michael's support for her version of reality. I sometimes wondered if this would motivate her to examine her own behavior, or if it would just make her more entrenched in her victimhood. The answer came 6 months after Michael and I had begun rebuilding our relationship. I was in my apartment on a quiet Thursday evening, reading by the window while gentle rain tapped against the glass, when my phone rang. Sarah's name appeared on the screen, and my heart jumped despite months of emotional preparation for this call. I let it ring 4 times before answering, giving myself time to center and prepare. "Hello, Sarah." "Mom." Her voice sounded different again. Not the manipulative sweetness of her previous call, not the cold anger of our cafe confrontation. Something rawer. More vulnerable. "I need to talk to you," she said. "I need to see you. Please. I know I don't deserve it, but I need to ask you something." Every instinct I had developed over the past year told me to say no. This was exactly the kind of scenario Maria had warned me about, the emotional emergency designed to bypass my carefully constructed boundaries. But something in Sarah's voice stopped me from immediately refusing. "What did you need to ask me? I can't do it over the phone. Please. Will you meet me? Just for an hour. I'll come to you, or we can meet somewhere public, whatever makes you comfortable." The desperation in her voice was unlike anything I had heard from her before. This wasn't the calculated vulnerability she had used to manipulate me in the past. This sounded real. But I had learned to be suspicious of my own hope, my own tendency to believe what I wanted to believe rather than what evidence suggested was true. "Sarah, if this is another attempt to get me to give you money or change my boundaries, I'm not interested. I've been very clear about what it would take for us to have a relationship, and those requirements haven't changed." "It's not about money," she said, and then corrected herself immediately. "I mean, it's about money, but not the way you think. Please, Mom. 1 hour. And if you never want to see me again after that, I'll understand." Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her. But I chose the location carefully, the same cafe where Michael and I had begun our reconciliation, somewhere public and neutral, somewhere I could leave easily if things went badly. 2 days later, I sat at the same corner table where my relationship with my son had begun to heal, waiting for my daughter to arrive. I was dressed carefully, my armor of confidence and self-respect, prepared for whatever manipulation or emotional ambush she might have planned. But when Sarah walked into the cafe, I almost didn't recognize her. She looked terrible, thin in a way that suggested stress rather than intentional weight loss, dark circles under her eyes, her usually perfect hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She was wearing jeans and a sweater, clothes that looked clean but unremarkable, nothing like the designer outfits that had been her uniform for as long as I could remember. She saw me immediately and walked over with none of her usual confident stride. She looked nervous, uncertain, younger somehow than her 38 years. "Thank you for coming," she said as she sat down across from me. "I wasn't sure you would." "I almost didn't," I admitted. "What did you want to talk about?" She ordered coffee with shaking hands, and I found myself studying her face, looking for signs of calculation or performance. But she seemed genuinely distressed, genuinely uncertain how to begin. I'm broke, she finally said, the words coming out in a rush. Completely broke. I'm going to lose my apartment. I've lost my job. I've ruined every relationship I have. My friends won't take my calls. Michael won't help me. I have nowhere to go and no one to turn to. My first instinct was familiar, the overwhelming urge to fix her problems, to write a check, to tell her everything would be okay and that I would take care of her. But underneath that instinct was something else, a deep sadness that this was how she had chosen to approach me. Even now, even in her desperation, she was leading with her financial crisis rather than with any acknowledgement of how she had treated me. I'm sorry to hear that, I said carefully. That sounds very difficult. She looked at me with confusion, clearly having expected a different response. Aren't you going to? I mean, can't you help me? I'm your daughter. You are my daughter, I agreed. But I told you months ago what it would take for us to have a relationship. You haven't done any of those things. You haven't apologized for forging my signature. You haven't acknowledged that what you did was wrong. You haven't shown me any respect or consideration. You're only here now because you need money. Sarah's face cycled through several expressions: shock, anger, calculation, desperation. I could see her trying to figure out what approach would work, what words would crack my resolve. But I'm desperate, she said. I could end up on the street. Doesn't that matter to you? Of course it matters to me, I said. You're my daughter. I don't want you to be homeless or hungry or in danger. But I also won't enable the behavior that brought you to this point. What behavior? What did I do that was so terrible? And there it was, the fundamental disconnect that made reconciliation impossible. She still couldn't see what she had done wrong. She still viewed my protection of myself as an inexplicable cruelty. I pulled out my phone and showed her a photo I had taken of the forged lease agreements months earlier. You tried to rent out my home without my permission. You forged my signature on legal documents. When I discovered what you had done and set boundaries to protect myself, you tried to have me declared mentally incompetent so you could access my assets anyway. She stared at the photo, and for a moment, I thought I saw something that might have been shame cross her face. I was trying to help you, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. By stealing from me? By lying to me? By trying to convince authorities that I was mentally unfit? She started, then stopped. For the first time in our conversation, she seemed to be really grappling with what she had done rather than just trying to find the right words to manipulate me. We sat in silence for several minutes. I could see her thinking, struggling, perhaps for the first time really confronting the reality of her actions rather than the justifications she had constructed around them. I need help, she said finally, and her voice was small and broken. Yes, I agreed. You do need help. But not the kind of help I can give you with money. What do you mean? Sarah, you're 38 years old. You're intelligent, educated, capable. But you've spent your adult life believing that other people should solve your problems for you. You've never had to develop resilience or resourcefulness or the ability to face consequences because I was always there to rescue you. She was crying now, quietly but steadily. So you're just going to let me be homeless? You're going to let your daughter live on the street? The emotional manipulation was expertly deployed, designed to make me feel like a monster for not immediately solving her crisis. But I had learned to recognize these tactics, and they no longer had the power to override my judgment. I'm not letting you do anything, I said. You made choices that led you here. Adult choices. And now you need to make adult choices about how to move forward. I don't know how, she said, and for the first time, I heard something that sounded like genuine honesty from her. Then maybe that's what you need to learn, I said gently. Maybe this crisis is an opportunity for you to discover that you're stronger and more capable than you think you are. But what if I'm not? What if I can't handle this on my own? Then you'll figure out how to get help in appropriate ways. There are social services, job placement agencies, career counselors, therapists. There are ways to address financial crises that don't involve manipulating your family members. She looked at me with a mixture of desperation and something that might have been the beginning of understanding. You really aren't going to help me, are you? Not financially, no. But I'll support you in other ways if you're genuinely ready to change. If you're ready to apologize for what you did to me. If you're ready to treat me with respect. If you're ready to build an adult relationship based on mutual care rather than financial dependency. She started, then stopped again. I could see her warring with herself, part of her wanting to say whatever words she thought would get her what she needed, another part of her perhaps beginning to understand that this approach would never work again. I'm scared, she admitted. I know, I said, and meant it. Change is scary. Growing up is scary. Taking responsibility for your own life is scary. But it's also the only way to develop genuine self-respect and genuine relationships. We sat quietly for a while longer. I could see Sarah processing, struggling, trying to figure out how to move forward in a world where her mother was no longer available as an unlimited resource. Finally, she looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "I don't know how to apologize to you. I don't know how to make this right." "That's honest," I said. "That's the first completely honest thing you've said to me in years. I don't even really understand what I did wrong. I mean, I know you say I stole from you, but in my head, I was trying to help. I was trying to make sure you were being smart with your money." This was significant, not an apology, but an acknowledgement that she didn't understand the impact of her actions. It was a starting point, perhaps. "Sarah, how would you feel if someone you trusted forged your signature and made decisions about your property without asking you?" She was quiet for a long moment, actually considering the question rather than just trying to deflect it. "I would feel violated," she said slowly. "Like they didn't respect me. Like they thought I was incompetent." "Yes," I said. "That's exactly how I felt. But I'm your daughter." "Doesn't that make it different? Does it? Are daughters allowed to steal from their mothers? Are family members exempt from treating each other with respect?" Another long pause. "No," she said finally, so quietly I almost missed it. This tiny acknowledgement felt like a miracle. For the first time in our conversation, Sarah had admitted that what she had done was wrong, not just misunderstood. "I'm sorry," she said, and something in her voice suggested she might actually mean it. "I'm sorry I violated your trust. I'm sorry I made decisions about your property without asking. I'm sorry I tried to have you declared incompetent when you fought back." The apology was simple, direct, without qualifications or justifications. It wasn't perfect. I could tell she was still struggling to fully understand the magnitude of what she had done, but it was real. I felt something in my chest begin to soften, despite all my carefully constructed defenses. "Thank you," I said. "That means more to me than you know." We talked for another hour, carefully and tentatively beginning to explore what it might look like for us to rebuild our relationship. Like with Michael, I made it clear that this would be a gradual process, that trust would have to be earned over time, that financial support was off the table while we figured out how to relate to each other as adults. Sarah accepted these conditions with a grace that surprised me. Not happily, I could see her fear and uncertainty about facing her problems without my financial backup, but without argument or manipulation. As we prepared to leave, she asked the question I had been expecting. "What should I do about my apartment? About my job situation?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "What are your options?" It was clear that she had expected me to tell her what to do, to take over the problem-solving process as I always had before. The idea that she would have to figure it out herself was foreign and frightening. I could look for a roommate to split expenses. I could apply for jobs outside my usual field. I could ask friends if anyone knows about openings. I could look into unemployment benefits. Each suggestion seemed to surprise her as she said it, as if she was discovering for the first time that she had options beyond waiting to be rescued. "Those all sound like reasonable places to start," I said. We agreed to meet again in 2 weeks, same place, same time. No promises beyond that, no commitments to anything more than seeing how things developed. "Mom?" Sarah said as we stood up from the table. "Yes? I really am sorry. I know I don't fully understand everything yet, but I want to try. I want to figure out how to be someone you can be proud of again." Those words broke something open in me that I had been protecting for over a year. Not enough to make me forget everything that had happened, but enough to give me hope that healing might be possible. "I want that too," I said. Over the next several months, Sarah began the slow, difficult work of rebuilding her life without my financial support. It wasn't easy. She had to take jobs that were beneath her education level, had to move to a smaller apartment in a less desirable neighborhood, had to develop skills and resilience she had never needed before. But she did it. She found creative solutions to her problems. She learned to budget and prioritize and make difficult decisions. She discovered that she was more capable than she had ever imagined. More importantly, she began to understand the impact of her actions on our relationship. As she struggled with her own challenges, she developed empathy for what I had experienced during years of being treated like a resource rather than a person. "I never asked you how you were feeling," she said during one of our coffee meetings, months into our reconciliation process. "All those years, I never once asked if you were happy or lonely or scared. I just assumed you existed to solve my problems." "What made you realize that?" I asked. "Having to solve my own problems," she said with a rueful smile. "It's hard. It's scary. It's exhausting. I can't imagine dealing with all that while also trying to take care of adult children who treated me like an ATM." This insight represented a fundamental shift in how Sarah saw our relationship. She was beginning to understand that I was a person with my own needs and feelings, not just a source of solutions to her problems. The transformation wasn't instant or complete. Sarah still occasionally slipped into old patterns of thinking, still sometimes seemed more interested in what I could do for her than in who I was as a person. But the overall trajectory was positive, and I could see genuine effort to change. Both of my children were now part of my life again, but in completely different ways than before. Our relationships were more equal, more respectful, based on choice rather than obligation. I enjoyed their company without dreading their requests for help. They seemed to value my perspectives and insights without seeing me primarily as a solution to their problems. As I sit here now, 2.5 years after that first terrible discovery of the forged lease agreements, I can honestly say that my life is richer than it has ever been. Not because I got my children back, although I'm grateful for that, but because I learned to value myself enough to demand respect from others. The penthouse that once felt like a prison now feels like a sanctuary I chose. The solitude that once felt like punishment now feels like the foundation for genuine connection with others. The independence that once terrified me now feels like the source of my strength and peace. My days are full of activities that nourish my soul. Art classes where I continue to discover new ways to express myself. Book club meetings where I engage with literature and ideas and women who have become genuine friends. Volunteer work that gives me a sense of purpose beyond my family relationships. Time with Maria, who remains my closest friend and trusted advisor. And yes, time with my children. Not the anxious, transactional time we used to spend together, but genuine enjoyment of each other's company. Conversations about books and movies and current events. Shared meals that aren't interrupted by requests for money. Moments of connection that feel real rather than performed. The relationship with Sarah is still more fragile than the one with Michael. She's still learning how to relate to me as a person rather than as a resource. She still sometimes struggles with the urge to ask for financial help when faced with challenges. But she's trying, genuinely trying, and that effort means everything to me. Michael, meanwhile, has become someone I actually enjoy spending time with. He found a new job, one that pays less than his previous position but provides more satisfaction. He's learned to take pride in solving his own problems and supporting himself without assistance from anyone else. When he talks about his work and his life, there's a confidence and self-respect that was missing when he was financially dependent on me. Most importantly, both of my children have apologized not just for their specific actions, but for the overall pattern of how they had treated me. They understand now that love isn't just about providing resources or solving problems, it's about seeing each other as complete human beings worthy of respect and consideration. This understanding has allowed us to build relationships that are sustainable and genuine. I don't have to worry about what they really want when they call, because they've learned to express their needs honestly and appropriately. They don't have to worry about managing my emotions or manipulating me into giving them what they want, because they've learned to take care of themselves. The change in family dynamics has been profound. We don't see each other as much as we used to, but when we do, it means something. Our interactions are based on genuine affection rather than obligation or necessity. We choose to spend time together because we enjoy it, not because some external pressure compels us to maintain contact. But perhaps the most important transformation has been in my own sense of self. I am no longer the woman who believed she had to buy love with money or tolerate disrespect in order to maintain relationships. I know now that I am valuable just as I am, worthy of respect and consideration from everyone in my life, including my own children. I have learned to say no without guilt, to set boundaries without apology, to prioritize my own well-being without shame. I have discovered that self-respect is not selfish, it's the foundation for all healthy relationships. The fear that drove me to accept unacceptable treatment, the fear of being alone, unloved, forgotten, turned out to be worse than the reality of solitude. When I stopped trying to prevent loneliness at any cost, I discovered that I wasn't actually lonely. I was just surrounded by people who took my love for granted. Now I'm surrounded by people who value my presence in their lives, who contribute to my happiness instead of just drawing from it, who see me as a complete person rather than just a solution to their problems. The quality of my relationships has improved dramatically since I learned to demand quality in my relationships. If this story resonates with you, if it gives you hope or courage or just the comfort of knowing you're not alone in this struggle, please like this video and subscribe. Your support helps me continue sharing these stories, and maybe together we can help someone else find the strength to choose themselves over dysfunction, peace over drama, authentic love over financial manipulation. But more than that, I want you to know that it's never too late to reclaim your life. It's never too late to demand respect from others, including your own family members. It's never too late to discover your own worth and refuse to accept treatment that diminishes it. You don't have to accept crumbs and call it love. You don't have to financially support people who emotionally abandon you. You don't have to buy relationships with money or maintain them through sacrifice of your own well-being. You deserve to be surrounded by people who value you for who you are, not what you can provide. You deserve relationships that enhance your life rather than drain it. You deserve to feel proud of yourself instead of constantly questioning whether you're doing enough for people who never seem satisfied. Trust me when I tell you that the fear of losing people who don't actually respect you is worse than the reality of living without them. Trust me when I tell you that genuine loneliness is preferable to being surrounded by people who only see you as a resource. And trust me when I tell you that once you learn to value yourself properly, you'll attract people who value you properly too. Once you stop accepting poor treatment, you'll find people who are eager to treat you well. Your story of transformation is waiting for you to write it. Your life of authenticity and self-respect is waiting for you to claim it. You have the power to change everything, starting with how you see yourself and what you're willing to accept from others. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being part of this community of people who understand that love without respect isn't love at all, that family loyalty shouldn't require self-destruction, that it's possible to be alone without being lonely and surrounded without being loved. You are worth more than you know. Your peace matters. Your happiness is not a luxury you have to earn through suffering, it's your right as a human being deserving of dignity and respect. Now go out there and claim the life you deserve,